So over the last 2 days I've been reading from Terry Pratchett's Truckers, which is the story of a gnome called Masklin who seems fairly frustrated with his life, and at the very start of the book we had him escaping in a lorry with a group of other gnomes. The story's gone backwards and forwards a little bit, and if you want to get more about what's happened, please look at the previous 2 video extracts, but this is the 3rd instalment of Terry Pratchett's Truckers. It had seemed a good idea then. It looked a bit different now. Now the gnomes clustered at one end of the great dark space inside the lorry. They were silent. There wasn't any room to be noisy. The roar of the engine filled the air from edge to edge, and sometimes it would falter and start again. Occasionally the whole lorry lurched. Grimmer crawled across the trembling floor. "How long is it going to take to get there?" she said. "Where?" said Masklin. "Wherever we're going." "I don't know." "They're hungry, you see." They always were. Masklin looked hopelessly at the huddle of old ones. 1 or 2 of them were watching him expectantly. "There isn't anything I can do," he said. "I'm hungry too, but there's nothing here. It's empty." "Granny Morky gets very upset when she's missed a meal," said Grimmer. Masklin gave her a long, blank stare. Then he crawled his way to the group and sat down between Torrit and the old woman. He'd never really talked to them, he realised. When he was small, they were giants who were no concern of his, and then he'd been a hunter among hunters, and this year he'd either been out looking for food or deep in an exhausted sleep. But he knew why Torrit was the leader of the tribe. It stood to reason. He was the oldest gnome, and the oldest was always leader. That way there couldn't be any arguments. Not the oldest woman, of course, because everyone knew that this was unthinkable. Even Granny Morky was quite firm about that, which was a bit odd, because she treated him like an idiot, and Torrit never made a decision without looking at her out of the corner of his eye. Masklin sighed. He stared down at his knees. "Look, I don't know how long," he began. "Don't you worry about me, boy," said Granny Morky, who seemed to have quite recovered. "This is all rather exciting, isn't it?" "But it might take ages," said Masklin. I didn't know it was going to take this long. It was just a mad idea." She poked him with a bony finger. "Young man," she said, "I was alive in the great winter of 1986, and terrible that was. You can't tell me anything about going hungry. Grimmer's a good girl, but she worries." "But I don't even know where we're going," Masklin burst out. I'm sorry." Torrit, who was sitting with the thing on his skinny knees, peered short-sightedly at him. "We have the thing," he said. "It'll show us the way, it will." Masklin nodded gloomily. Funny how Torrit always knew what the thing wanted. It was just a black square thing, but it had some definite ideas about the importance of regular meals and how you should always listen to what the old folks said. It seemed to have an answer for everything. And where does this way take us?" said Masklin. Who knows that well enough? To the heavens." "Oh, yes," said Masklin. He glared at the thing. He was pretty certain that it didn't tell old Torrit anything at all. He knew he had pretty good hearing, and he never heard it say anything at all. It never did anything, in fact. It never moved. The only thing it ever did was look square and black. It was good at that. "Only by following the thing closely in all particulars can we be sure of going to heaven," said Torrit, uncertainly, as if he'd been told this a long, long time ago and hadn't really understood it even then. "Yes, well," said Masklin, and he stood up on the swaying floor and made his way to the tarpaulin. Then he paused to screw up his courage and poked his head under the gap. There was nothing but blurs and lights and strange smells. It was all going wrong. It seemed so sensible that night a week ago. Anything was better than here. That seemed so obvious then. But it was odd. The old ones moaned like anything when things weren't exactly to their liking, but now, when everything was looking bad, they were almost cheerful. People were a lot more complicated than they looked. Perhaps the thing could tell you that too. if he knew how to ask. The lorry turned a corner and rumbled down into blackness and then, without warning, stopped. He found himself looking into a huge lighted space full of lorries and full of humans. He pulled his head back quickly and scuttled across the floor to Torrit. He said. Yes, lad. Heaven? Do humans go there? The old gnome shook his head. The heavens, he said. More than one of them, see? Only gnomes go there. You're absolutely certain? Oh, yeah. Torrit beamed. Of course, they may have heavens of their own, he said. I don't know about that, but they ain't ours, you may depend upon it. Oh. Torrit stared at the thing again. We stopped, he said. Where are we? Masculine stared wearily into the darkness. I think I'd better go and find out, he said. There was whistling outside and the distant rumble of human voices. The lights went out. There was a rattling noise followed by a click and then silence. After a while there was a faint scrabbling around the back of one of the silent lorries. A length of line, no thicker than thread, dropped down until it touched the oily floor of the garage. A minute went by, and then, lowering itself with great care hand over hand, a small, stumpy figure shinned down the line and dropped onto the floor. It stood rock still for a few seconds after landing with only its eyes moving. It was not entirely human. There were definitely the right number of arms and legs, and the additional bits like eyes and so on were in the usual places, but the figure that was now creeping across the darkened floor in its mouskins looked like a brick wall on legs. Gnomes are so stocky that a Japanese sumo wrestler would look half-starved by comparison. And the way this one moved suggested that it was considerably tougher than old boots. Masculine was in fact terrified out of his life. There was nothing here that he recognised except for the smell of all which he had come to associate with humans, and especially with lorries. Torrit had told him loftily that all was a burning water that lorries drank, at which point Masculine knew the old gnome had gone mad. It stood to reason. Water didn't burn. None of it made any sense. Vast cans loomed above him. There were huge pieces of metal that had a made look about them. This was definitely a part of a human heaven. Humans like metal. He did skirt warily around a cigarette end and made a mental note to take it back for Torrit. There were other lorries in this place, all of them silent. It was, Masculine decided, a lorry nest, which meant that the only food in it was probably all. He untensed a bit and prodded about under a bench that towered against one wall like a house. There were drifts of waste paper there, and led by a smell which was even stronger than all, he found a good apple core. It was going brown, but it was actually a pretty good find. He slung it across one shoulder and turned round. There was a rat watching him thoughtfully. It was considerably bigger and sleeker than the things that fought the gnomes for scraps from the waste paper bin back home. It dropped on all fours and trotted towards him. Masculine felt that he was on firmer ground here. All these huge dark shapes and cans and ghastly smells were quite beyond him, but he knew what a rat was all right, and he knew what to do about one. He dropped the core, brought his spear back slowly and carefully, and aimed it at a point just between the creature's eyes. Then two things happened at once. Masculine noticed that the rat had a little red collar, and a voice said, "Don't. It took a long time to train. Bargains galore. Where did you come from?" The stranger was a gnome. At least Masculine had to assume so. He was certainly gnome height and he moved like a gnome. But his clothes... The basic colour for a practical gnome's clothes is mud. That was common sense. Grimmer knew 50 ways of making dyes from wild plants, and they all yielded a colour that was, when you came right down to it, basically muddy. Sometimes yellow mud, sometimes brown mud, sometimes even greenish mud, but still, well, mud. because any gnome who ventured out wearing jolly reds and blues would have a life expectancy of perhaps half an hour before something digestive happened to him. This gnome looked like a rainbow. He wore brightly coloured clothes of a material so fine that they looked like chip wrapping, a belt studded with bits of glass, proper leather boots, and a hat with a feather in it. And as he talked, he slapped his leg idly with a leather strap, which, it turned out, was the lead for the rat. "Well," he snapped, "answer me." "I came off the lorry," said Masklin shortly, eyeing the rat. It stopped, scratched its ears, and gave him a look. And then it went and hid behind his master. "What were you doing up there? Go on, answer me." Masklin pulled himself up. "We were travelling," he said. The gnome glared at him. "What's travelling?" he snapped. "Moving along," said Masklin. "You know, coming from one place, going to another place." This seemed to have a strange effect on the stranger. If it didn't actually make him polite, at least it took the edge off his tone. "Are you trying to tell me you came from outside?" he said. "Well, that's right. But that's impossible." "Is it?" Masklin looked worried. "There's nothing outside." "Oh, is there?" "Sorry," said Masklin, "but we seem to have come in from it anyway. Is this a problem?" You mean really you came from outside?" said the gnome, sidling closer. "Well, I suppose I do. We never really thought about it. What's this? What's it like?" "What? Outside, what's it like?" Masklin looked blank. "Well," he said, it is sort of big." "Yes? And there's a lot of it." "Yes, and yes." "With, you know, things in it?" "Is it true that the ceiling is so high you can't even see it?" said the gnome, apparently beside himself with excitement. "Well, I don't know. What's a ceiling?" said Masklin. "That is," said the gnome, pointing up to a gloomy roof of girders and shadows. "Oh, I haven't seen anything like that," said Masklin. "Outside it's blue or grey with white things floating around in it." And the walls are such a long way off, and there's a sort of green carpet thing that grows on the ground," said the gnome, hopping from one foot to the other. "I don't know," said Masklin, even more mystified. What's a carpet?" "Wow!" The gnome got a grip on himself and extended a shaking hand. "My name's Angelo," he said. "Angelo de Haberdashery." Of course, that won't mean anything to you. This is Bobo." The rat appeared to grin. Masklin had never heard a rat called anything except, perhaps, if you were driven to it, dinner. "I'm Masklin," he said. "Is it all right if the rest of us come down? It was a long journey." "Gosh, yes, all from outside. My father will never believe it." "I'm sorry," said Masklin. "But I don't understand. What's so special? We were outside, now we're inside." Angelo ignored him. He was staring at the others as they came stiffly down the line, grumbling. "Old people too," said Angelo, "and they look just like us. They've not even got pointy heads or anything." "Sauce," said Granny Morky. Angelo stopped grinning. "Madam," he said icily, "do you know who you're talking to?" "Someone who's not too old for a smack bottom," said Granny Morky. "If I looked just like you, my lad, I'd take a little better. Pointy heads indeed." Angelo's mouth opened and shut silently, and then he said, "Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, Dorcas said that even if there was a possibility of life outside the store, it wouldn't be life as we knew it. Please, all follow me." They exchanged glances as Angelo scurried away towards the edge of the lorry nest, but followed him anyway. There wasn't much of an alternative. "I remember when your old dad stayed out too long in the sun one day. He talked rubbish too, just like this one," said Granny Morky quietly. Torrit appeared to be reaching a conclusion. They waited for it politely. "I reckon," he said at last, "I reckon we ought to eat his rat." "You shut up, you," said Granny automatically. "I'm leader, I am. You've got no right talking like that to a leader," Torrit whined. "Of course you're leader," snapped Granny Morky. "Who said you weren't leader?" "I never said you weren't leader. You're leader." "Right," sniffed Torrit. "Now shut up," said Granny. Masklin tapped Angelo on the shoulder. "Where is this place?" he said. Angelo stopped by the wall which towered up into the distance. "You don't know?" he said. we just thought, well, we had just hoped that the lorries went to a good place to be, he said. Well, you heard right, said Angelo promisingly. This is the best place to be, because this is the store.